Hey guys, so we just had Voiceless Bologna, so as usual I wanted to provide a tier list of the best rogue decks in the current meta using data from YCS and regional level topping information as well as some data from Dueling Book as well. And as usual, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh supplies as well as singles. Keep in mind that crossover breakers, which is around the corner and also a meta defining set, the singles for pre-orders are available at Card Brawlers and you can use code Akuna5 for 5% off. And also keep an eye out for tier 0 games as well. They should have it very soon at the time of posting this video. And also, as always, definitely shout out to YGOProduct.com as well as Ivan for keeping track of all of the meta-relevant topping information. Anyways, this was the overall meta tier list that I provided a couple of weeks ago, so for the purpose of this current video, we're only going to focus on decks that are not in tier 1 and tier 2, although I'm going to make some exceptions as well. Ritual Beasts, Unchained, or rather Magical Muskets, as well as Pure Chair, we're also going to now move them into tier 2 and not consider them as rogue for the purpose of this video, just because since I did this overall meta tier list, these decks actually in particular have gotten several more tops, especially at the YCS level, so I think they're actually more so tier 2 now. Anyways, let's just start off the rogue tier list for this month, and we're actually starting with Voiceless Voice. So this actually recently topped the YCS Bologna as well. That one was playing a Fiendsmith package though, because from my understanding, at least at the regional level, the ones that were topping, they were playing more like the Nadir Servant package, whereas the Fiendsmith one, they weren't playing that. Of course, there's not enough space in the extra deck, for example. So this deck, you know, it's gone from like tier 1 status and really fell off, I think after info came out, really. So it's been kind of like in the rogue level since then. I think at least it doesn't get destroyed by Fuwalos, but although at the same time, I guess Purlia instead would be pretty hefty against this deck, although Purlia doesn't see nearly as much play as Fuwalos, I feel like, but I'll have to do a data check on that as well. So I think it's a pretty straightforward deck to play as well. I think I've seen some people actually make comments about, you know, this is kind of like the new quote-unquote Sword Soul in terms of just for new players learning how to play. This has some pretty straightforward lines of play, at least at the turn 1. So next we have White Forest. So this actually topped the North American Remote Duel YCS as well. You can check that deck profile on my channel. So I think the recent tops have actually been playing like the Fiendsmith stuff and as well as, let's say, Centurion stuff. But there are still a couple runic versions hanging around as well, at least at the regional level. That was kind of like the original way of playing it. I think like being able to do all the synchro stuff is pretty cool for sure. But you know what, definitely hasn't been doing as well as maybe people would have thought. And speaking of decks that I really thought would do well but not doing as well is Chimera, although it did recently get some YCS level tops as well. I think essentially if you're playing this deck, you're only playing like the Fiendsmith version now. You know, originally when it came out, you played with like branded stuff. There was like even a slight phase with like the Melodious package as well. But now I think the Fiendsmith stuff, it goes super well with this deck just in terms of its synergy. With Fiends, you can get like an extra Caesar out of it. You already do like a hand loop with your Fusion Chimera and then the Diabells forcing opponents to set and then being able to pop one is essentially like another hand rip really. So I think it is really strong going first. I'm a little surprised that it hasn't done as well as maybe I thought it would, but you know what, maybe we got to give it a little bit more time, even more. And then you have Flunder. So this also recently topped, but you know what, it's actually been struggling quite a lot lately, despite being like the best shifter deck really. But I think that just isn't enough anymore, and especially heading into the new format with crossover breakers, I don't think shifter is going to be at least not main decked because of something like Malice, for example, where you, if anything, you want to play Lancy against them, right? So I'm not sure if there's a lot of potential for Flunder moving into the next format. If you do play it, let me know. So next we have Spright. Unfortunately, no YCS level tops it seems, but at the regional level, you know, still hanging in there. This is a deck that I've actually personally started playing again, just because I've been taking a break from Branded Despia, and you know, this is actually a very affordable deck if you are looking for a new kind of rogue deck to play. And I think it's also pretty solid. You know, you don't have to play Fuwalos. Obviously it helps, but for me personally, I even side Fuwalos anyways in Spright, just because this deck, when it goes first, it doesn't discard for any of its effects really, which means that, you know, when you go first, let's say some other decks, like let's say if you have Diabell Star Witch, you can pitch the Fuwalos, at least has some kind of utility, like let's say with like Centurion, you have a field spell that can pitch as well. Spright, you don't have that kind of effect, so like really if you draw it, it just completely becomes a dead draw. So really you have a reason, or excuse rather, to not play Fuwalos if you don't want to pay for it. This deck is definitely solid going first. It can make Toad a lot easier now with the Mirror Mage stuff. And then on top of that, you know, going second, for example, the Mosquito line of OTK is actually still pretty good. And speaking of Mosquito, it's actually a win. So you actually also have an excuse to not buy Impulse as well. So I think it's pretty solid. It's definitely a rogue. I can definitely tell that its Fallout game without Elf, for example, it's been long banned. And it's the Fallout game is still definitely a lot weaker now. So next you have Sky Striker, which of course finished second place at YCS Niagara a month ago with Ryan Yu. And since then, you know what, it actually has several regional tops. So it's not a complete fluke, guys. Like if you do play this deck well, you can definitely have a chance. It is a going second deck though, so it's going to be a little bit challenging, right? Especially when you have the deck like Tenpai that's also trying to go second in the current format as well. But you know what? You have a lot of power spells nowadays available, and you can still, I guess, hanging in there if you are a good pilot. So next you have Salamangreat. Honestly, it wasn't that long ago that this was in like a tier 2 conversation for quite a bit of time, just because of all the very strong generic fire support that's been in the mix. Lately, it's been more like at the rogue level. I mean, it is still solid, especially a rogue option. You know, you have a lot of non-engine. You have an archetype counter trap, some pops with another trap. So I think it's solid. It's funny. It also has like rank 4 plays, like Abyss Dweller, Baguska, whatever. But I guess, you know, heading into the new format, you have Rizal, which is like rank 4 turbo to the max. And I guess you might as well play that. Someone even told me that, you know, Rizal is basically like the modern iteration of like Salamangreat. So, you know, that's something. So next you have Scareclaw, which apparently topped the YCS. I couldn't really find a deck list though, so definitely let me know if you are aware of it. If it is like pure Scareclaw and not like the Vanadium deck that just plays a few Scareclaw cards, you know, I think it's still, I haven't seen it in like a year at least, but it is pretty interesting. They're like Link 4, essentially is like a Baguska. They also have kind of like a cool gimmick with like defense position and being able to attack in that regard. And you know what, nowadays, like a lot of people tend to put their monsters in defense mode just because of Lightning Storm, and then that actually helps them draw an additional card with their combos, so that's kind of nice too. So next you have Pearly. So the ones that recently topped were actually Kashira Pearly, you know, playing like Unicorn, Fenrir, like Birth, which by the way, I think one of those three will get hit on the next list. So they were also main decking Shifter as well, which from my understanding, Pearly can play under Shifter if they're the one going second, but if Pearly goes first, I think it does hurt them in terms of Shifter, but they do have a lot of discards that they need to do anyways with their quick play spell, so I'm guessing you just pitch it off if you do draw Shifter going first. Pearly Noir though, let me know if you do play Pearly and how that is in the current format. I'm guessing against Tenpai at least you can like sit on that. I believe you can also make like Fucho as well to kind of just survive, but in terms of other decks, I'm not sure how good it is. Maybe Snake Eye, Azamina, like Fire King, maybe they have too much gas for Pearly Noir to handle, especially because I'm also noticing, you know, most of the lists weren't playing like Underworld Goddess to get rid of it anyway, so definitely let me know how Pearly Noir is. And then you have Branded Despia. This deck, it did top YCS though, to be fair, and regional level wise it's not doing nearly as well as, you know, it's probably accustomed to, because it is pretty hard to survive with this deck, right? With Dominus Impulse being really strong and that negating effects, also essentially getting through the Branded Loss protection as well. It's just an added level of threat on top of Ash that's already going to be very not only always popular, but even more so now because of Fuwalos, just to try to stop that. And speaking of Fuwalos, of course, that is also something that can lead to a lot of draws against Branded Despia. So you know what, it's not the best time. I think maybe moving to the next format, who knows, with crossover breakers, hopefully it's a little bit more playable, but my hope is that they just ban Sanctifier and then they just bring back Brand of Fusion to like 2 or something. So next you have Dragon Link. So I did look through some of the topping lists for this one. I don't think much has changed really, and I mean nowadays really I think it's more like bestial control almost. Their end board isn't like super oppressive like Dragon Link used to be back in like maybe a few years ago, like in the early days of the pandemic when they were tier 1. So as I always say, I'm confident this deck will always come back at some point. Konami really loves dragons, they're gonna make it work, but for now at least they'll hang in the rogue level. So next we have Stun. I put a runic image. I usually do just because traditionally it's like runic stun decks that are the ones that are actually topping, but nowadays the most recent ones that topped, at least at the regional level, were the Dogmatica stun version. You know, essentially you were just playing like Fossil Dana, you have like Jowgin, and then the Decisive Battle of Gondola, that's like the continuous spell of like Dogmatica cards, which kind of helps protect their cards as well. So you know what, it's not fun to play. It has not topped at the YCS level though recently, which has been doing pretty well, you know, previous formats, but I guess nowadays it's not doing too well. Maybe there's just with Skill Drain going to 1, I don't know if maybe that was enough to kind of cut this off from YCS level topping, but it is a cheap version of a deck to kind of combat in the current meta, but at the same time maybe it's not doing as well. And then you have tier limits, definitely no YCS success, but you know, some regional level success. I mean, you know, Fuwalos and Pearlia probably hurt this deck quite a lot, so I'm guessing it's probably not the best spot. I don't think you see as many Bestials though nowadays, but still, I guess moving into the next one on Malice, they do play Bestials more so to like enable their own combos, but at least, you know, if they are going second, I mean, that still hurts 2 elements anyway, so maybe it's not the best time. So next you have Hero. So since that one regional top with like that 60 card Primat list, there was another Hero top at a regional level that was sort of a more quote unquote normal list. And so with Hero, I'm not actually sure how it is, you know, with like Macrocosmos effect of Darklaw is always usually pretty strong. But at the same time, I have also found Super Poly has been relatively popular too. I should do like another Top Cut breakdown, see how popular it is recently. But you know what, Super Poly can be pretty strong against this. And I don't think they play Dark Angel, at least they don't don't main deck it anymore. With a lot of decks playing Anima, right, because of like Snake Eye stuff, so it's not as good. So I can imagine it's not really amazing as it was maybe in some other formats, but at the same time, you know what, Supreme Darkness in January, I'm sure that will make this deck a lot stronger. And then you have Mimigul. I really wish this deck came out just like a lot earlier, at least like a year, because it's not very overpowered, right? If it came out a year ago, it still would have been power level wise considered pretty fine, I would think. But just because with Dominus Impulse, and if the opponent plays it, then Mimigul just becomes completely useless, which is too bad. I think the gimmick is really cool. I've definitely had a lot of fun playing against this deck, as long as they don't drop Shifter, for example. But I really think it's a cool interactive kind of playstyle. It's really fun. It's a cool gimmick. I just wish that it came out at a different time, especially with the support that's come out recently and just at the time when Impulse is very popular. So next you have Orcus. This actually did really, really well at YCS Bologna, so that was really cool to see as a rogue option. So this deck, he was particular main decking like the horse stuff, which is a nice touch, right? You've seen them like, let's say, pitch like Harp Horror with like the horse engine, so that was really nice. And then also with horse stuff, because they're all big bodies, you can play something like Skill Drain, which he was main decking, and kind of you can do like a beatdown game as well. I believe he was also playing Super Poly. The deck is also mostly dark, so you can play Dominus Impulse as well. So the deck does become expensive, unfortunately, but at the same time, hey, at least as a rogue option, at least it did really well. So, and then you have Plant Link. It's funny, I find so often this deck does better at like YCS and WCQ level than actually at like the regional level. You know what, I guess people still don't really know what it does. I mean, I feel like I still don't really know much to commentate on either, but clearly, if you do know the deck well, there is still potential to do well with it. So next you have Traptrix, which I believe topped one of the remote duel YCSs. So you know what, I think about a year and a half ago when the structure deck first came out, it was very popular, especially at the regional level. There were some tops. I think there were some sporadic YCS tops back then as well. I'm going to be honest though, I think this deck isn't really all that strong, especially going second. I do find that though, especially if you're a new player though, I think it's actually pretty good in terms of learning how to play the game. This deck is pretty good for that. I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of like turn one combos, and being able to play traps. It's kind of like the old days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Too, with like all these kind of different kind of trap holes. So I think that part is cool. But in terms of like, despite being maybe like a budget option, I do think that there are better budget rogue options out there. So next we have Vanadium. So I'm kind of interested in what kind of board this ends on nowadays. If you do play Vanadium, let me know. I mean, with Barone being on, which was kind of like a staple in that deck, I do see that they're usually playing like the level 10 Synchro Sword Soul one instead. Some of the top of the list were playing like the horse stuff, some playing like Cashier, which is kind of like pretty usual. So definitely let me know if you do play the deck, how you feel about it. I do think that Droll is pretty popular in the format right now actually, so I'm not sure if that's really good for them though. So finally, we do have Gimmick Puppet FTK. So you know what, it did top at the regional level. From my understanding, if you open the field spell, you can still FTK despite those hits on the ban list. I mean, to be honest with you guys, I am kind of glad we're not seeing this much at all now, because FTKs are just not very fun, right? I mean, I get it, some tier 1 deck end boards maybe is like essentially the same as an FTK, but at least, you know what, at least like, let's say board breakers can still do something, whereas with FTKs you can only rely on hand traps, and only specific hand traps, especially something like Gimmick Puppet where their field spell is really, really strong and provides some kind of protection effect. But nonetheless, you know what, at least it did find some success this time around. Anyways guys, that was it for the rogue tier list for the current month. Hopefully you found that helpful and interesting as you prepare for the next format. Really excited to see what's going to be like with crossover breakers. Again, you can definitely go check out those pre-orders at Card Brawlers and Tier 0 Games and use my code Akuna5 for 5% off. Anyways, big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons and sponsors as always, and well, take care guys.